Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody to the next phase of our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. We have today 5 knowledge keepers from various parts of the world. So without further ado, we're going to go over to Miigam'agan, which is a colleague of ours for the Writing Relations Steering Committee. And she is an elder herself, so she is going to open the this meeting with a prayer and in a good way. Miigam'agan.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Again, thanking everyone here who is with us. I'm going to do a traditional acknowledgement and welcoming in my language. The translation of it a bit. Vangeli Inahadu Dijabohan Madi. Vangeli Abaji Gawaskai, Galo, Abajara, Minajuhan. So many gratitudes to our spiritual ancestors, both human and non-human. All the Thanksgiving, the prayer is all about Thanksgiving to the source, to all the source of life that sustains us, and honoring the people that are here in the circle, and that we continue to remember who we are and why we are and how we are as a human species. And thank you.
Miigam'agan, for that prayer. I'm really apologize for the clarity of it, but some people have large bandwidths and other people unfortunately do not. And but the intent is there. Hold on 1 second, please. Hi, Tito. Can you just give me a minute, please? Okay, so our elder is online. One of the elders is online, and we're trying to get him hooked up to the to this webinar. So if we can all be patient, I'm going to hand this over to our very first speaker, which would be William, and I believe Renee is going to introduce him. So in the meantime, I'll be working on getting this dude online also.
Thanks, Michelle. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And yeah, apologies about the distortion with Miigam'agan, as the bandwidth isn't as great. But we really wanted to bring, people today to start really talking about how we work moving forward and build those right relations as we move forward in Canada. And I was really excited to be connected with William Dere through a colleague of mine here in Edmonton called Sean C. So William is a Chinese Canadian activist and filmmaker. We did send kind of his bio out, and brings a lot of history and experience and a really important perspective, I think, to the table today. So William, I'd just like to invite you to start us off sharing your thoughts, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Renee. My name is William Ging Wee Dere, and even though I was born in China, I consider myself to be a 3rd-generation Chinese Canadian. So maybe I'll start off with a little bit of historical background about myself and my family, since I'm new to this group. My grandfather came to Canada in 1909. He paid a $500 head tax. He brought my father to Canada in 1921, and he also paid the $500 head tax. And after he married my mother in China, the Canadian government had already imposed the Chinese Exclusion Act. So he was not able to bring my mother to join him in Canada. And so for about 3 decades, our family and all Chinese Canadians were separated by law imposed by the Canadian government. So for 62 years of Canada's history, there were racist laws in the form of the head tax and the Chinese Exclusion Act against one particular group of immigrants. And fast forward to 2019, 110 years later, we still see that when a government legislates against one group of people, it makes the society a lot less accepting of others who are different. I'm talking about the Bill 21, Law 21 here in Quebec, where the government legislated against religious minorities and excluded them from working in the civil service, such as teachers and daycare workers and so on. So we have to ask ourselves, how much have we learned from history over the last 110 years? So having said that, maybe for those of you who may not know too much about the head tax and the Chinese Exclusion Act, 81,000 Chinese immigrants were made to pay a total of $23 million into the Canadian Treasury for the privilege of coming to Canada. No other immigrants were made to do that. And then in 1923, when money was not enough to keep the Chinese from coming to Canada, the government imposed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so it was not repealed until 1947. And the only reason why it was repealed was that Chinese Canadians volunteered to fight during the Second World War. And when they came back from the war, they demanded equal rights, such as the right of citizenship, the right to vote, and the right to bring their families to join them here in Canada. And on top of that, the UN was I guess, drafting the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in order for Canada to take part in that, Canada had to, I guess, repeal various obvious racist and discriminatory legislation. And so for those two reasons, but primarily because of the efforts of the Chinese war veterans, the Exclusion Act was finally repealed in 1947. And after that, my father was able to bring myself and my mother to Canada. And that's why I say that even though I was born in China, I'm a third generation Chinese Canadian. So fast forward to say 2006, since 1984, the Chinese Canadian community tried to redress the 62 years of discriminatory legislation against the Chinese community. And so we campaigned since 1984 with the help of the NDP, Margaret Mitchell in Vancouver. So it took us 22 years, a whole generation, before we were able to force the Canadian government with Stephen Harper making an apology to the Chinese Canadian community here in Canada in 2006. And the surviving head taxpayers and the surviving widows of deceased head taxpayers were eligible for redress if they were still alive when Stephen Harper assumed power earlier that year. So a total of, let me see the numbers here, 785 Chinese Canadian survivors received compensation in the form of redress for a total of $15.7 million. And that is still less than the $23 million of face value that was collected in the form of the head tax. So the Canadian government was able to make a profit from the Chinese Canadian community in the form of the head tax. And 12,000 other surviving head tax families whose head taxpayers or widows did not survive until assumed power, they receive nothing than empty words in the form of an apology. So I guess I'll just conclude by saying a few words about what's happening today. There's an upsurge of anti-Chinese, anti-Asian racism because people are looking for scapegoats in the time of crisis, especially a crisis that people don't really understand too much about due to the pandemic of the COVID-19. People are looking for scapegoats. And so an obvious face is an Asian or a Chinese Canadian face. And so we are the ones that are suffering the brunt of this racism that is going on today. There's so many examples, and one of the obvious ones that happened last week was when a 92-year-old Chinese senior was kicked out of a convenience store by this burly white guy who, insulted him with racist insults, and then pushed him out of the store and down to the sidewalk where he hit his head. And so that was a very egregious act of racist violence against a senior, a 92-year-old senior from our community. And there are other examples here in Montreal. Buddhist temples, statues in front of Buddhist temples were broken by some vandals. 2 Korean Canadians were stabbed with knives in the subway system. Korean restaurants were vandalized with their windows broken. Chinese restaurants suffered the same fate. And so we're starting to fight back. We have a coalition that's building, actually centered in Calgary. It's a new network that we've put together with people from Vancouver, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. And over the weekend, the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice, they put forward a survey, and the survey was very disturbing because according to a survey, let me have a look at the numbers here now, at least 13% of those surveyed were aware of racist incidents perpetrated against Asian Canadians. Another strange one, well, not too strange, but 45% of those surveyed said they would not sit next on the bus to an Asian person. So almost half of those surveyed said they would not sit next to a bus, sit next on a bus to an Asian person. And 14% of those surveyed agreed or didn't even know that Asian people carried the COVID-19 virus.
Oh.
So you can see the kind of sentiments that are out there today. And that is why there are some people in our community who are fearful of stepping outside, who are fearful of going to grocery stores to do shopping. And even doctors who are Asians, who are fearful of treating some of their patients because they have relatives who would come in and say, no, I don't want this person touching my relative here. So this is a kind of situation we're facing today. And like I said, at the same time, we're organizing a fight back. We're trying to educate people. We're trying to tell people that a virus does not discriminate, that a virus does not know the color of your skin. And so if a virus does not discriminate, then why should you? So that's where we're at today. And we're getting together with people right across actually North America. And we're also like to get the support of all those outside of our community to ask for your support for the struggle that we're going through today. And I know that many of you have suffered the same kind of racism in your daily lives and in your history. And so I think it's time that we all banded together and to make Canada much more tolerant and accepting society. Thank you.
Miigwech, very much for your words. They do resonate with me because I was reading in the newspaper that this is actually pouring over to the Inuit community. 3 Inuit in Montreal were spit on and told to go back to their country of China. And unfortunately, they're already in their own country. And I just wanted to bring that forward, that now there is no disparity. It's just somebody that looks Asian, and that could be any First Nations person, even here in Canada. So I just wanted to put that in there. Miigwech.
Okay. Nextly, I'm really proud to share somebody else here from Treaty 6 territory in Alberta, Deborah Dobbins. And Deborah Dobbins is the president and CEO of the Shiloh Center for Multicultural Roots. And I've had the privilege of knowing Deborah for a number of years now, and always have like a really soft place in my heart because we both kind of herald from and have some roots in Wildwood, Alberta, which is a small hamlet. So Deborah, I'm going to just pass over the microphone to you. Get you up here. Make sure I get you unmuted.
Thank you so much, Renee. And thank you, everyone, for sharing with me today, and also giving me the opportunity to share about some of the history of the African American Canadians who first settled here in the early 1900s here in Western Canada, and some of the struggles we went through, just similar to many of the other presenters here today. I'm 3rd generation African American Canadian descendant, born in Edmonton, Alberta, and my parents were born in Wildwood, Alberta. My grandparents came from the United States in the early 1900s. My grandfather on my mom's side came from Texas. He had to escape the terrible things that were going on down there in Texas when he was a young boy. He was 15 years old. His uncle told him one day he had to leave and never come back because of the white people were coming to possibly kill him or the family. So he had to leave. He went down through Mexico and worked his way from Mexico up to California as a cowboy, excellent cowboy. He remained a cowboy till he passed away here in Edmonton at 101 years old. He had to fight prejudice. He was light-colored skin, and so he was able to pass as Mexican to avoid being re-enslaved or possibly killed and persecuted. He met my grandma, who was from Oklahoma, and they made their way up through Nebraska with 2 children and came to Alberta to homestead. Homesteading possibilities at that time for Alberta and Saskatchewan, I think Manitoba, was $10 for a registration fee, and you could get 160 acres of land to homestead. You had 2 years to build a home on it and also clear a certain amount of land. My grandfather did that along with my grandmother's help. My other grandparents each came from Illinois and Missouri, and they came up the same way to get that land because of the Jim Crow law in Oklahoma and other southern states. It was worse than slavery almost. So they made their way up to Alberta to help settle Alberta, develop Alberta from a brand new province. African American Canadians were met at the border with many more stringent laws and requirements to be able to come across. They didn't want Black people here in Western Canada, but still my family came. They met all the requirements. They cleared the land. They became electricians and bus drivers and doctors and lawyers, along with other families who came up from the States. So we are part of Canada's history. We helped develop Alberta. And because of the color of our skin, we are still considered less than equal. So that is one reason why I'm here today, to share our history with all of Canada. We aren't very well known about our history isn't well known here in Canada, and it's very important that all of Canada know who helped develop Canada and who are here today to continue to fight for equity for all people, not just African American Canadians who I represent. I told you a little bit about how we came to be in Western Canada. There's a lot of information and history about Eastern Canada and the Blacks who were there in the early 1600s and even before that. But it's important that just because the color of our skin is different and we are Canadian, we are still on the receiving prejudicial treatment, and we're here to hopefully work with other people across Canada, other cultures and races, to, like it says on the presentation today, writing relations, and how can we get together and strengthen numbers to make this world more equitable. Let me see, what else can I tell you? I think that it's important that we all need to feel safe here in Canada, and being judged by our outward appearance is not a good way to show that people trust you if they are judging you by what you look like. Instead, we need to be respected and accepted for our inward abilities and our capabilities, and to be judged that way. And I'm hoping that with this group and others working for social change, that we truly can be an equitable country where all people count. Thank you.
Miigwech for those words. I was listening to your journey to the Saskatchewan, or to Manitoba or Alberta. And I remember when I was living out west in Saskatchewan, before I left there was just starting to be a Black presence in Saskatchewan. Up until then, it was either First Nations or it was white people. And as I went through the history of Saskatchewan, the KKK actually tried to make its time here in Canada, but it didn't quite take. But there was one province in Canada where we had 40,000 signatures in 1929. And do you know which province that would be by any chance?
Of course.
I'll let you guys take a guess at it. I'm pretty sure those from the West know the answer to that one. But feel free if everyone wants to take a stab at which province it was. I would like to hand this over to a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine. He was actually, I met him when I first moved to Ottawa, and his family was the one responsible for the sound system at our powwows, and still is. He arrived in Ottawa knowing anybody, and we've taken him into our community as our own. However, he does represent his own community as an elder and a knowledge keeper. And he's taught our community and many other communities a lot of information. So I'd like to welcome right now, Tito Medina. Miigwech, Tito, for being here today. You need to unmute yourself.
Miigwech, everyone. I'm so glad, I'm so honored to be here with you, sharing as well, some of the good energies, I would say, the fire keepers from the land of the Maya. I'm based in the unsurrendered Algonquin territory in the National Capital Region in Ottawa, in Canada. But of course, we keep the links with our elders and our fires and the newer generations. And it's so important because arriving as a refugee, at a certain point in our lives to these lands, we really met, the feeling, the deep feeling of solidarity. And I remember when we were just like, lost birds with my two daughters and my wife, and then there was an opportunity to participate in one powwow. We signed in, at the Agua Native Friendship Center as volunteers. But we were basically, the honored guests. Instead of, doing any work, Michelle and many friends over there, basically show us what meant to be, part of the indigenous community, in this land. And this teaching of love, of compassion, make us really to make the connection, because we come from a land that has been abused for almost 500 years, 496 to be exact. And to be, escaping the brutality, of what had happened, for many, 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 many generations in our land, and to escape and being alive, in another land was a blessing. And I'm starting from that point because we are the lucky ones who are alive. I would say most of my friends got killed before I became 25 years old. I'm talking about, hundreds of people that I met when I was young. When we talk about genocide, we are talking a continuous genocide against our people. In Central America, in Mesoamerica, in Guatemala particularly, there's a lot of persecution and killings against our people's leaders. And now that women has to be, upfront, they are getting persecuted and killed as well. Just this year, we have many people who is, not just trying to survive the crisis of coronavirus, but they have been, accused, falsely accused, before the courts for crimes that they never committed. And their only crime is to be resilient, to carry their own traditions, to speak their own language, to keep the forms of organization and governance that were taught us for generations. And of course, we are not talking about the Maya of just one single culture. We are a large group of families, linguistic families, and ethnic groups, whatever you want to call us. But what is important is that we relate to each other. We are over 30 languages. We are over 120 dialects in a small region that is based in the south of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. And of course, we have blended, because that's why when we call us Maya Mestizo, is not just because our Maya heritage, but because as well our blood has been, you know, getting from one tribe to the other. We have been in that land for at least, you know, 25,000 or 15,000 years. Just our calendar, you know, is counting, you know, a cycle that just ended of 5,200 years. But this is the fourth cycle of that. Even our ancient people, 3,000 years ago, had the knowledge that they were there for over 20,000 years at that time. This is not the first round of the calendar, and it is not the end of the world as well. That's why when we arrive here to this land, and we have the honor to meet many people, many of the local elders, and learning from their, you know, their teachings, their sharings, sharing the history of our people as well. And then that's why it makes a lot of sense when we met with Grandfather William, Commander, when we were talking about, you know, the Circle of All Nations and this, the ability to, for some in our nations, you know, to take the boat to the falls, and knowing that beyond that, all these unexpected, you know, moments, you know, there will be another time. And doesn't matter if we can live it or not. I think is we start to share, you know, some common, you know, elements in our stories and history to enlarge our vision, because this is important, you know, that we tell the stories of the North to the people in the central of the continent and to the people of the South. This is part of the, what we call, you know, the eagle and condor teachings. Some people will call it prophecies, but we just, in Central America, we just call it, you know, the eagle and condor, or the quetzal bird, you know, teachings. And the other one is what is so related with this time. And it's about, sometimes we can get confused about when you're talking about to being a spiritual being. You're becoming so spiritual that sometimes we don't put, you know, our feet on the ground. And it's the combination of both, you know, is the science, the technology that we have developed, you know, through all those years. It's, our language is part of our what we created. And as one grandmother says, about 3 months ago when I was over there, about the fire, that the sacred fire is to honor the first tool that was, you know, a consistent tool developed by our ancestors. That's why the newer generations need to know how to light a fire. Doesn't matter if it's rain or wind or snow, or if it's under the sun, to keep that fire and to remember where we come from, who was building our culture. That's why when the grandfather says all our relations, there is something that is so important, because this is the connection among our languages. In the Maya tradition, we are just a part of something very complex in cosmos. We are not better than anything. We are not lesser than anything. We are just another structure. And when one mosquito moves, all the cosmos is moving. When one flower dies, you know, all the cosmos is reaccommodating the structure. Every single structure is the center of universe. And this is so important, because no one can see the 4 directions from a different point, from a unique point of view. Each one has its own perception about the 4 directions, because each person, each entity is the center of cosmos, we see everything as living things. But those teachings are embedded in many, many cultures in this planet. It's not something that we just own. No, we just have a small element, but all together we can just put a nicer, understanding about how we understand or how we misunderstand ourselves. And that's why being part of this is so important, because we have many tools that has been given to us. If we share them, if we learn at least, some words in the language of our ancestors, you don't have sometimes, to understand the whole linguistic complex. Sometimes just learn 20 words that were spoken by your great-grandparents for the people who were before you in the place you were born or raised, 300, 400, 1,000 years ago. And then you will see how people was able to survive lots of challenges and develop their own ways to be responsible, to carry and to carry the knowledge, but to care for all the nature that were surrounding them, respecting the animals, respecting the cycle of the rivers, the cycle of the water. And this is basically something that I think that will give us the strength, to overcome any of these political and physical or medical situations. Resilience based, in what we learn from our ancestors and what we are able to create with our minds, with our hearts, with our hands. Because even the Maya calendar, that we are revered so much at this time in our land, that was an invention of someone. But we have to create our own tools. We have to use the new means of technology, like now where we're using a computer and telecommunications, but not to get just addicted to that. Use it just as a tool. And thank you, really, to invite for this invitation. I think that it's going to be wonderful to see everyone to think and to connect in a new ways, to create a world that is more in balance, and a humankind that is thinking more about keeping in balance with Mother Nature. And despite where you were born, and your role into your community, your sexual preference, your ethnic or linguistic, relations, or your own identity, wherever you want to define it, just to find a place to build something that is going to bring harmony, not just with this planet, but who we are in the context of the whole cosmos. I think that it's so beautiful to see the children and to watch them sometimes, in these the video conversations, what they're doing. Because this change already started, and they are just envisioning a new world that we were not able to create even in our minds. We need to learn from them in order just to be just a little bridge, I think, between our enjoyment in the past and our suffering in the past, our history, our stories, our myth, to wherever is coming. But this is at the power of our culture. If we own it, we can transform it. We can just recreate it because it's ours. And this is inside our hearts, inside our minds. And that's why when our hands are doing something, when we are talking about something, is because everything is starting just to reach this new balance. Doesn't matter how small. An atom is so powerful that sometimes you can create so many changes. It's like this particle that is flying around. It's almost invisible. And it's attacking, certain portions of Mother Nature. Of course, We have to see that we are not the superpower, being of the creation. We are just another element of this. And hopefully, we as humans, we can stop the abuse and work to our different world. Okay, miigwech, everyone. Maltiosh, we said down there, or gracias.
Gracias, miigwech. Tito, I really appreciate those words, and I do enjoy sitting and listening to your peoples talking about our future, because it does coincide so much with our teachings. And I really appreciate that you made the point that the calendar is going through its fourth cycle, and or is it fourth cycle? And that is something to think about. It really broadens the picture, as opposed to just this small little incident that we're dealing with today, which is a virus. So I'm going to hand this over to Adriana, who's going to introduce the next knowledge keeper. Miigwech.
Hello. Hi. Yes, I would like to introduce Heryka. Heryka is, she's part of the Hamilton Circle from the Central Region. We invite her because she really inspires us. I think that when she shares her history, her hurt, we all are going to understand why we keep her as our knowledge keeper too. Thank you, and thank you, Heryka, for having accepted this invitation.
Thank you, Adriana and Mantiosh, to Tito and to Deborah and to William for sharing. This is really quite an honor, and it's really honored that I was even asked, and I'm very nervous, and that's okay. I've learned that when the nerves come and the heartbeat starts growing and the sweat, it's because it's time to speak, and that I really, really care. And I find it really interesting that I go right after Tito. Un gran saludo, Tito. Greetings to Tito and to all of you. I am also a very proud daughter of Guatemalan immigrant parents who was born and raised in the United States for 33 years. And then have been in this region in the Hamilton, or I should say in Ontario, for the past 13 years. I just had my anniversary, April 23rd, 2007 is when I moved here. So I share lots of greetings from these beautiful traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee peoples, commonly known as the Hamilton-Niagara Peninsula region. And I'm so blessed to be alive and to give so much gratitude to those that have come before me. My parents met in the US in the 70s and left their family's land and culture for a better life of opportunities. Both of my parents are from Guatemala. My mom, I want to say her name is Elvia Amparo Pellecer, who was born and raised in the department of Suchitepeques, which is situated in the southwestern region of Guatemala, and the capital being Mazatenango in the municipality of Patulul. My father, Erwin Roberto Miranda, was born in Guatemala City. We are considered mestizos, people of mixed European and indigenous ancestry, and we're also considered Ladinos, which I have a very hard time with. And there's a very long history of Ladinos that I'm researching and looking into. Because Latino, it refers to mestizos with this middle class who have attained some level of upward social mobility above the largely impoverished indigenous masses. My parents have been able to achieve this Ladino status, even though both of them have had very interrupted and informal levels of education, because they migrated to the US through legal means, and they have been told to disregard their indigenous heritage, and they had the ability to send remittances back to their families in Guatemala, and most importantly, to have children born in the United States. They were forced to leave Guatemala due to political and socioeconomic hardships in the early 1970s, and subsequently relocated to the same country that funded the horrific 36-year civil war. The history of forced migration and separation of families is ingrained in my identity, and is also what motivates me much of my community work and artistic work. So I have one brother who's a year older than me, and we are our parents' like most precious gifts, and we're their pride and joy. We have been able to achieve their wildest dreams and go beyond because of a lot of their sacrifices. And so and I miss them so much. And both my brother and I, we were born in New York and in Baltimore, and I was living in Washington, DC 15 years before coming to Ontario. So I am currently in this time of, as I was listening to the webinar, and I listened to it a couple of times, and the first thing that comes to mind in terms of what elders Cliff Summers and Ron Tremblay and Miigam'agan spoke about so eloquently in the webinar that really touched me is the importance is to connect or reconnect to spirit in this ancient ancestral knowledge, and to look inward for the answers rather than outwards. I found that a lot of people, including myself, have been almost thirsting and desperate to like find like this spiritual connection, this more connection like to the environment. Like there's been these amazing elders that have come through my path and have only encouraged me to do the same, is to like, Heryka, stop looking outward and look inward. And I came to my family as a dancer. I am a dance artist, and with very informal training, but it's something that I love to do. And I totally feel like our first form of communication comes through movement, right? We didn't come talking, we came crying, we came moving and using facial expressions and gestures, right, to communicate what it is that we needed. So I think that what the elders have said in the past webinar is this notion that each of us are connected to earth-based knowledge from our ancestors. And I truly think that in order to strengthen solidarity with other nations, we need to know who we are and who we come from. And the legacy to me is to understand the history of where we come from, so that we can share the knowledge with others, but also, and I think from someone who has a very difficult relationship with this notion of Ladino, also to learn and learn about the Ladino reality, and also to say I'm sorry and to ask for forgiveness for like say some of our ancestors and their decisions in really hurting other people, and in this case Latinos towards indigenous peoples in Guatemala. So that's something that I find that's really important and really difficult to do, but I think that we need to be guided, and so I really appreciated the push or the encouragement, the task to find our own bundle from our backgrounds. As Ron Tremblay said, like from whatever nationality that may come from, it seems to be incredibly essential at this time. And I wanted to share that something that has been passed down to me is this notion from a Mayan elder, is that we are in a time also of becoming the people of the honey, so people of the bees. And so through cooperation and collaboration and collectivity is something that we truly need to embody. And I totally feel like the COVID-19 is bringing us and pushing us to that, you know, in very profound ways. And it's uncomfortable, but we are being asked to be uncomfortable and looking truly at ourselves and creating our bundles and whatever that may be, and ask for forgiveness and be there in a way. It really takes a lot of courage and patience and energy to believe in the process of even asking for guidance from our ancestors, and to trust in the fact that somewhere down the line, our ancestors were all earth-based people at one time. So I come from a long line of romantics, of like serious heart people. And particularly on my Miranda side, paternal Miranda side, our family usual cause of death is through enlarged hearts or heart related disease. And so I've been searching for really interesting and creative ways to explore to my response and reactions to suffering. Our people have suffered a lot. Our people continue to be dehumanized in very profound and evil ways. And it's really difficult for me sometimes being here in Canada, even though I came because I found love and he brought me here. But also there's so many, you know, the migrant crisis just really tears me into shreds. And when I was living in Washington, D.C., I was really taken under the wings of so many Salvadorans and Guatemalans that came from war-torn countries and dealing with so much trauma, being tortured. And it's just a constant reminder, like this, you know, I'm always praying that it just stops, and it's not just something that has happened in my community, you know, as we've heard in the previous presenters. So it's something that really is quite profound, and the suffering is very real. So one of the things that I try to do is like, how do I learn to be in the suffering, and try really hard to connect to the heart of the earth and the heart of the sky. And one of the ways, or the ways I've been able to find that, is through movement and through dance and through storytelling. And one of the things that I have found is this method of land dancing. And so as Tito was mentioning, like connecting to the environment. And so I'm like a city rat. Like I was always like around big cities or in close proximity to big cities. So I had more of a relationship with concrete than I ever did the soil or farmland or gardens. So, and I was a break dancer at the time. And so the concrete was really cool. But I found that through land dancing, it made me truly fall in love and taught me how to develop a relationship to soil and water, and how to care deeply for the earth, plants, and animals, and the people who work tirelessly to till the soil and plant a seed and care for every process of growth, the harvesting and the packaging. I've been able to develop some beautiful relationships with migrant farm workers that work here and Guatemalans that work here in the Niagara region. And one of the things I through those relationships with migrant farm workers and that connection again to the soil, it's reconnected me to my maternal grandfather, who I found out was a farm worker in Guatemala, in Patulul, on a Spanish-owned farm. So I found that like working with the land and now embodying the soil, understanding that my skin and the color of our skins are the earth, are the different, you know, hues of the soil, and that our blood is the water, and that our, you know, our breath, you know, is the wind, right? And our fire is the spirit. Like all of those things I've learned in a very embodied way, where I don't really speak it, but like the feelings and emotions come through, and then all of a sudden there's shapes, there's facial expressions, there's tears. And I'm so grateful for dance because of that. And the ways that we go into space and ask and request for permission from the land to actually transmit those teachings through us in very subtle ways that are not from here, but from a place of the heart. So I'm very grateful for those teachings. And one of the questions I think that was posed for us to kind of prepare a response was, what does the solidarity and justice look like to me? And for me, solidarity is, I truly feel like, is the shifting of hearts and minds of people to love again. Miigam'agan was saying how we're afraid to love in the last webinar, and that really hit me hard. And the severing of our inner world, and the severing from our sacred mother. And so I find that solidarity and being embodied and in tune to the earth again, and caring for it is going to bring us back. And it's not from a place of charity anymore, because I feel like charity comes from a place of guilt and pity. And we don't need that shit anymore. I think we're done with that shit. Like, we've been done with that. And so I find that solidarity and justice for me is truly about finding freedom. And the only way we can find freedom is to truly know, like, where we come from, and the good, bad, and the ugly, and ask for forgiveness and go deeper into a place of reciprocity and humility, integrating, knowing that truly, like, we're all connected. I found that sometimes it's so overwhelming. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, look what's happening to the animals. Look what's happening here. But it's like a ripple effect. Like, once we start, it starts with us, and we start caring and connecting and collaborating like the bees in a hive together. Like, things will come to a balance. And I don't mean to be romantic about that, because I think it's very, very hard work. I also think that we need to really go to a place of revalue multiple literacy, multiple intelligences that are people. I've worked for many years with people with developmental disabilities, and have created artworks with them, and they're still very isolated, and they're still very invisible, like many other vulnerable and marginalized populations. But I find, like, their voice, it comes from like the womb voice for me, especially those who don't speak with words. They remind me of the importance of the body language and the facial expressions. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I mention that, and also the forgiveness, and remembering the legacies of those who are no longer with us. For a very short time, I worked with Spasaqsit Possesom, who is a Honduran from the Lenca Nation, who fought hard for the rivers and for her people, and who was brutally murdered. So I think of her and all the people that fight for the forests and the rivers and the waters. And we don't need any more martyrs. Like, we do not need any more martyrs. But we need to look at, like, their legacies and continue those legacies, because those legacies are our legacies and our children's legacies, or in my case, my nieces and nephews, because I don't have any children. But anyway, I just want to close with saying thank you. And I do want to share the only words that I know how to say in a Mayan language, which is Oyum Hunanku Eva Maya E Maho, which someone told to me means the harmony of mind and nature. So, thank you.
Oh, miigwech. I really appreciate you incorporating that in the physical also. And we will be talking on another webinar. We'll be continuing our conversation about carrying of the bundle. That is something that I think a lot of people are very interested in, and we are thinking about that in the next one. We have one more speaker to get to before this questions can be asked. And this speaker is my sister. Her and I did a 7-year jail sentence together. We have traveled ceremonies, powwows. We've watched each other grow in so many, many ways. And I have watched her take her journey, and as I was taking mine, but we always came back together, and she shares all her knowledge. She's an auntie to my kids, and she's part of our Two-Spirit community, the LGBTQ 2+ community, or I should say 2+ first. Anyhow, I would like to introduce you to my bestest friend in the whole wide world, Sharp Dopler. Sharp?
Ani bojo kwe se goskana goa Sharp Dopler indishna kas Newfoundland dundiba jijala gimish kwaki ash kwaki minwa Irish Anish nabijin kausen nimiki makwa do dem shkabewas nijo manatok Wakichida. Hi, my GST name is Sharp, and I'm coming to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people.
Excuse me just 1 second, please. Sorry. Could you put your video on so people know who you are?
Oh, I forgot to take the blue off. I turned it on the button. That's how smart I am. So I've lived, worked, and played in Ottawa for 27 years. My people are Sac, Fox, and Cherokee, and as you can tell by my deep dark tan, my mother was Irish. I have a lot of white privilege. And we saw that evidence, Michelle and I, when we did our 7-year stretch at the detention center, when we were doing InReach, and the ways that the guards related to her and the way that they related to me. Michelle mentioned I'm a member of the Two-Spirit community and a carrier of ceremony. A lot of misunderstandings about the term Two-Spirit. Some people think it means that we have two spirits. No, not so much. What it means is we're the middle people. What it means is we're hard to define and fit in a box. What it means is we're a gift. There's a long history about how that term came to be in 1990. It was created as a placeholder until we could take back all those terms in our own languages. And I love what Tito said about being able to get to speak just a few words of your ancestors' languages. The language that I use is Anishinaabe Moin. I'm related to the Anishinaabe through my Sac Fox ancestors. And I struggled for a long time about whether or not I should try and walk those teachings that were being given to me, whether or not I should embrace that language. Till one of my aunties got about this close to my face. And she said, "And who are you to question the teachers that Creator sends to you?" Like Tito, that honor of being able to learn another's ways is a beautiful, powerful gift. And I've been lucky. I've traveled to South Africa. I've traveled to Mexico. I have had the opportunity to meet Indigenous peoples from all over the world, from Aotearoa, from Chiloé, from all over the world. And one of the things that is most powerful and most beautiful for me is how beautiful and how powerful it is when we can come together. When we can talk about our experience of colonization, because so many peoples have been colonized. Even my Celtic ancestors were colonized because they were tribal peoples. My professional work is doing education on Indigenous cultural competency. I like to call it cultural safety because there's really no such thing as cultural competency. We're all kind of bumbling our way along. Lots of times people say, particularly in Canada, they'll say, how do we make reconciliation happen? I like writing relations much better than reconciliation, because reconciliation presupposes that there is a relationship of equals, that there was something really good about that relationship in the first place. And if you know the history of Indigenous people anywhere, not just in Canada, you know that it was never treated as a relationship of equals. Despite the Royal Proclamation of 1763, it was never treated as a relationship of equals. Writing relations is better. It comes from a place of heart. It comes from understanding that there are many things that we need to do to correct what has happened as a result of colonization. As a two-spirit person, it's even more challenging, because there's a whole lot of writing relations that needs to be done just in terms of two-spirit people in Indigenous communities. In lots of our communities, we don't have a space. There are lots of places where we're not welcome in ceremony. That's a problem. And I've been ever so lucky to have wonderful elders and community members who have loved me and supported me to get to wherever the hell I am. It's coming together and having these conversations that makes the change. It's listening to one another's stories. There's nothing more powerful than sitting on the floor of a conference center with an African healer and talking about how when someone passes away, this is what we do. We do the same thing. It's a little bit different. To sit with an African healer and gift her a drum, and the first thing that she does is to put tobacco on it, which is exactly what I would do. They use it differently. But it's still tobacco. It's important to reclaim those things, to reclaim our languages, to reclaim our ways of being, to listen to one another, to let go of our fear. Because it's the fear that gets in the way, right? Like William said at the beginning, people are afraid because of this virus and they need a scapegoat, and they're targeting people of Asian descent. And they're doing that from their fear. The same thing has happened to Latinx people in the States and in Canada. The same thing has happened to Black people in the States and in Canada. The same thing has happened to Indigenous people in Canada and the US. And in our own territories, we are treated as interlopers and as visitors and as unwelcome. We're told to go back where we came from. Or in my case, people argue with me about my indigeneity, about whether I'm Indigenous enough. And the key to that cultural safety is letting go of the fear, is understanding that I don't have to be afraid of what's different from me because I'm different from everything else. And when I start to understand that my difference, understanding my difference, understanding the lenses that I look through, and how that impacts how I relate to people, one to another, to another, to another. That's when I let go of the fear. When I understand that we all have stories to share. And understand in those stories how much we have in common. Because these things, these bodies, they're just shells. They're not who we really are. Who we are is spirit. It's what lives inside. It's what we carry around. That's the beauty and the power and the strength that we can find. And that's how we can find a way to right relations, to bring justice, to stop our women and girls from going missing, from experiencing violence. To let Two-Spirit people have a place in our communities, a place of honor, instead of having to fight to be who we are. I've been so lucky. I grew up always knowing I was Indigenous, but not knowing anything else. Not having a mechanism to learn about my own culture because of the place where I was growing up. And then I came to Ottawa, and I was embraced by the community here. And what a mind-blowing journey it's been, because in close to 30 years, I've gone from being someone who knows little about culture to carrying ceremony for community. And it's humbling, and it's powerful, and it's beautiful. I loved what Heryka said about the land and our connection to the land, because that's the heart of being Indigenous. That's the heart of healing, being able to get out on the land, to see one another, to listen to one another. Michelle joked at the beginning about how I'm not quite in Ottawa. I'm within the city limits, but I live out in the country. There's farms around me. There's peace and quiet around me. I don't hear sirens and the constant noise. And that's a gift. And I try to share that gift because that's part of my privilege with the rest of my community. This is a time of change that's really difficult for so many people. Many of our people, Indigenous people, don't have access to stuff like this. If you live on reserve, you may not have internet access. If you live in the city, you may not have a home or internet access. Access to technology generally. We're living in the time of this pandemic, and many of our people don't have access to clean water. They say, wash your hands. How do you do that when you don't have clean water? Many of our women are experiencing violence. And all of the stories about this virus are talking about how violence is increasing. How do you escape when everybody's isolating, when everything's shut down? We talk about writing relations, and sometimes it can feel like writing relations is an impossibility. How can we possibly change everything? And it's the same answer that I have for when people ask me about reconciliation. What can the government do? The government can't do anything. The government's not going to fix it. How it's going to get fixed, how relations are going to change and be made right, happens one-to-one. When we can sit with one another over a cup of tea and share our stories and let go of our fear. It happens one-to-one, because as we make that change one person at a time, the whole world changes. I've been an activist a huge part of my life. And I am still, but it's changed. I don't have to be out and loud and noisy, although I'm sure Michelle would tell you that I'm often out and loud and noisy. I can make just as much change being quietly here, in my home, available for my community, available for whoever needs to be on the land, to access ceremony, to explore spirit and our connection with spirit and our connection with one another. I can make as much change that way as I can on the street. These are difficult times for many, many people as we hunker down, as we take that time for reflection. As an Indigenous person, it's interesting that this stuff has come just as we enter the season where we're supposed to begin to emerge, you know, from that isolation that is mandated by our spectacular Canadian winters. We're supposed to emerge from our lodges like the bears, having spent that time in reflection. And here we are at springtime, and we're still in our lodges. And it's particularly difficult for some of us. We look forward to powwows, we look forward to those gatherings, we look forward to round dancing, we look forward to ceremony, we look forward to all those opportunities to connect, to have those things that help us feel less alone. And it's difficult when we can't access that. So we keep finding small ways to be able to connect and remember our connection, to sing and to dance and to drum and to be on the land. I think that these webinars are a spectacular opportunity, particularly since they're being recorded, and it's going to provide an opportunity for people to learn who might be afraid to come to a gathering. I've talked to non-Indigenous people who've told me about their fear of being attacked, being blamed, of feeling guilted and shamed. And that's not the direction we need to go. It's only love. Love and kindness and respect and compassion for one another that's going to make things right between all of us. It's going to repair that circle that's been broken, the circle that we're all a part of, this circle right here. We all have a place in it. I'm humbled and honored to have been part of this, and I want to say miigwech to the folks who organized it, and I think that's enough. Miigwech, ni kanagana, all my relations.
Oh, miigwech. Sharp. You touched on a lot of things, and you put us back on the earth, and I appreciate that. We have quite a history ourselves, you and I, and the knowledge you carry and are being recognized as an elder within your circles is something I have been watching happen over the years, and I am so proud of your path. You are indeed my sister, and I could not imagine my life without you. Miigwech for attending this. So now we're coming to the question and answer part. So we have over on the side, we have a chat if somebody would like to ask a question. We already had a question already, and I'm going to kind of refer back to that. And it was by somebody who unfortunately had to go, but because this is recording, this is a good time to be able to get an answer to the question that was being asked. And so for Heryka, can you please explain a little bit more about the teaching of the people being of the honey?
Yeah, I heard about it on a webinar actually in 2012. And it was with that Eric Gonzalez, who is located in California. And yeah, I was, from what I can recall, first of all, the fact that the bees, are, have been suffering for so long, and that something along the lines of the bees as an example, but like this could be for other animals as well, because there's so many animals that have also, have gone on, but like what kind of imprint have they left, in us, especially those that have spent time, but in particular the bees, because they have been dying off due to so many pesticides and, they're, that it was just that time, that this kind of from 2012 onward, we were going to be entering a time where we truly needed to embody the medicine and the teachings of the bees, which I mentioned was like the cooperation and the collaboration, and the collectiveness, right? It's not of just one person, right? It's of the whole community. And I know we've probably heard various iterations of that. And metaphorically or as pure knowledge, but that's like the extent of from the teaching. But it's something that has stuck with me for quite some time, because there's like that nectar, that sweetness, and that what Sharp was talking about in terms of the love and the kindness and how we treat each other. Like we need to be that sweetness. We need to be that and become the pollinators.
The hope.
The hope.
Miigwech. I'm hoping I'm still being heard. Yes. Okay, yeah, I'm still being heard. We have another question, and thank you. And this goes over to Tito. Tito, could you please talk about the meeting, explain the eagle and the condor meeting, and are we in that time right now of that prophecy? And just to let you know, I have been able to go to these meetings, and it's absolutely amazing. But let Tito explain, please.
I will try to be very brief on this, because it's a series of teachings around that.
Mm-hmm.
First, we have to see that we are so lucky here to be in Turtle Island. And Turtle Island is basically North America and the northern, not all North America, but it's from the northern part from Mexico to the Arctic. And then this the area of what is called now, we call it Mesoamerica, because it's basically the people that's related with the calendar system that is basically the use of math and astronomy and astrophysics to build this kind of tradition. We are people of the, when it's mentioned, bee people was possibly the name of the old, how people call themselves in ancient times, in the Maya area. But there is as well the people from the south. And this is important because in the people from the people of the south, there are basically three major areas. And one is the Chibcha area that starts from Panama and goes basically to Ecuador and goes to parts of Venezuela, including Colombia. The people from the Amazons and the people from the Tehuantizuyo, that is the Inca Empire that happens. But what is interesting is that there are eagles from the north to the south. And at a certain point, I think that there was this getting together of two feathers. The condor feather that was used, in the south, and the eagle that was used in many of the other areas in the Americas. And but they were disconnected. and that's why there is an element that is linking those ones, is the time and space represented by the quetzal bird feather. The eagle and condor is going to get, because there is going to be a new connection based on the need of survival, of sharing our teachings. And that's why it's so important. People who will accept, you know, what is, and that's why it coincides in some ways about the rainbow, the eighth, you know, and the eighth fire, because there is people who is going to accept who they are, and it's going to be people to reject who they are. It's like in the case of Guatemala, okay, we have two terms. They're almost similar, but they're not equal. One is Ladino, and the other one is Mestizo. And with the Council of Elders, we have been talking about that, and basically we reach to one position. You know, Ladino is the one who feels ashamed, who rejects, who whatever, who is able to dominate its own people, because he wants to be in the relation of the power of the dominant culture. Mestizo is the one who maybe don't think about it, they don't care about saying who were their parents, whatever, or the ones who just accept who they are. And in the same way, the eagle and the condor are birds representing two cultures, or two major trends in cultures. But at the end, we need to connect. And this is what is going to give us the power, you know, to reach the new level of harmony. But it's not this harmony that is going to flying in our ribs. No, it's the harmony that we need to make our relationships straight. And that's why I like when Sharp is talking about that. Because like I said, okay, I never want to be a military, but I was forced, you know, they came with the bombs and with the airplanes, and they were killing my friends, and I have to recover some parts of my family and my friends. The head here and 200 meters away, you know, a body part. I still some members of my family who are still disappeared, but am I going to just to put in my heart all these, you know, the stress and to carry that burden? No. We need to create something that is more important based on what our mothers used in the past, is love. This tender love, you know, to nurture the new baby, the new relation that we have with our neighbor. And doesn't matter how much we fight each other, we can coexist. And this is the importance of that. Part of the teachings of the eagle and condor, that it doesn't matter how many differences we have, we need to coexist and to build the proper bridges. That's why it's so important, maybe put it in technical terms nowadays, is the cross-cultural communication. To value that the most important part in consensus is to recognize that the census is the real nature. Every particle is different, but we can learn from each other. I will stop there because, but, you know.
Big witch, Tito, and I can relate because we could talk about this forever. I know I could. And I have learned so much for this through you and many others about this subject. I am just full of information. I'm full of questions. Unfortunately, William had to leave us, and so we're not going to be able to get some more more ideas from him or any more insight from him, which I'm very sorry for, because he definitely touched on a couple of things also. And I'm going to turn it back to the audience, and if there's any more questions, we have until 2 o'clock. So if there is any more questions, I would really appreciate people asking, as we want to get the knowledge out the best way we can, and there's no better way than the people sitting in the room right at this point in time. Okay, I would like to hear some more from Deborah, some thoughts or reactions? Can somebody be a little bit more, what would you like to hear? Oh, the question I asked Deborah, I should say, sorry. Deborah, I had mentioned about 40,000 KKK members signed up. In which province is that? Would you like to answer that question?
Yes, Alberta had its own KKK organization. And in Edmonton, their downtown, they had an office, and it just recently closed in the, I think in the 90s, between the 1970s and 1990, that office and that organization was officially disbanded because they weren't keeping up with their yearly paperwork. So the KKK well, hopefully it isn't anymore, but it was very, very active in many parts of Alberta. And we're still feeling it now, especially with the way that things are going on in the United States at the moment. That has really raised up some of that old KKK attitudes and things toward people of color.
True.
Yeah.
Deborah, how are you seeing that manifest today among the Black community?
Well, just from the African American Canadians that have been there over 100 years, we're still facing prejudice in the workplace, in the schools, in recreation, in sports, wherever we go. And like I said, with Trump and that attitude of make America great again, make Canada back to how they wanted it when they first started Canada. I'm hearing that the attitude was they didn't want any black spots in Alberta, for instance, or black people. That's what that means. That ugliness has raised its head again. We have many African diaspora in Alberta. We're one of the largest people of immigrants from the African and diaspora. So there's a lot of visible minorities in Alberta, and that just gives fuel to the fire for those who want to burn us.
Yeah, unfortunately, that attitude is still very much alive, and Canada has this weird concept that there is no racism in Canada. And obviously we know that comes from the Western thinking. If you had to explain to, and you have the opportunity now, how racism affects your family, what is the most powerful word you could use?
Okay, how does racism affect my family? I was raised to not see color. So we were raised not to talk about, our skin differences in school and wherever we went. So up until my cousin from the States talked about, Black Power, when all of that came into being, then that's when we really realized, at least to open our eyes, I guess, to see things when people were treating us inappropriately, to see it, maybe it was race rather than they just didn't like me. So let me see, how do I say? My family, I teach my family the same way. Don't see color, but be prepared. Be prepared to face injustices, but don't accept it because you're just the same as anyone else. And rise above, that's the other one. Rise above when people do treat you differently and negatively because of the color of your skin. I teach my children, which I have 3 children and 8 grandchildren. So we try to prepare them for the world, how it is, but not to react negatively to negative responses to us because of the color of our skin, to rise above and really realize that it's the person that has the problem, not us. Hopefully that answers your question.
Those are good. Those are good. Good teachings, actually. One of the disconnects I found within our communities is the fact that our communities, whether they be First Nations, whether they be Black communities, whether they be Latino communities, Mayan communities, I find the connection isn't there. I find that we are not getting together. We set up events to get together, but in our events, it's like an afterthought. And like, I just went to a round dance earlier this winter before this epidemic had happened. And I seen Black people at our gathering of this round dance. And I was so thrilled to see them. And I said, we need to see more of this. We invite people into our circles, but as somebody had mentioned, they don't necessarily feel welcome, or they're afraid that they're going to be rejected or pushed to the side and maybe not be part of the group. And that is very hard, I have found. I grew up in a white world where I was the only Indian, and I found that very challenging as a child. So as an adult walking into our communities, how can we open them up to let people walk in and be welcome? And I'd like to have an idea coming from Shark this time.
Oh, sure. Give me the difficult question. I think that openness comes again from those one-to-one relationships, right? Being able to connect with people one-to-one to help them to let go of their fear. Because even sometimes when people want to connect, there can be fear. There can be fear of being judged, of feeling like they don't belong, that like they're not really welcome, and those sorts of things. And I guess my best example for that is my wife. My wife is white, white, white. She's Scottish on one side, she's German on the other side. And we've been together for 25 years. And my wife is still uncomfortable sometimes to come to community events with me because she doesn't want to take up space in Indigenous communities. She doesn't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable because an oppressor is there. And my wife is the least oppressive person on the face of the earth. That has changed slightly since we started offering ceremony here. She's very good at making people welcome on our land, in our home. So I really do think, you know, in the work that I've done for many, many years in community and trying to pull together different stakeholders, they like to call them stakeholders from all these different communities, and we need to have this voice at the table, we need to have that voice at the table. And I, you know, I'm really beginning to understand that kind of general invitation isn't working, doesn't work. It's intimidating for people. I think getting back to basics, doing those one-to-one reach outs, which Michelle is incredible at. Like I am in awe of your ability to reach out and make connections with people, like real connections, not just like, here's my card, call me, like real connections. And I think just like Michelle, in making those one-to-one connections in order to broaden our circle, to make our circle more complete, we need to be like Michelle and be relentless. Because she is relentless. When she's working for community, she's relentless. She's inexhaustible. She just keeps going and going and going. And that's what we need. You know, we need to take that chance. People are often asking me, you know, non-Indigenous people say, you know, how do I learn more about the Indigenous community, and how do I make those connections so that maybe I can provide some balance for all this stuff? Go to a powwow. Go to a community gathering. Like, just show up. Well, maybe they won't want me there. Just show up. What's the worst thing that could happen? Somebody will say, go away. So go away. And it's not the same. It isn't any different, sorry, than, you know, as a two-spirit person in community, there are places in community as an Indigenous person, because I'm two-spirit, where I will go and be told to go away, directly or indirectly. And then the teaching for me in that is that that's not the place for you to be. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities for you to connect to ceremony or connect to community or connect to other people who are part of this beautiful medicine wheel. So that's what we need to do. Have more tea.
I so agree with you about the tea, except I always got to go to the washroom afterwards. Tito, what's your suggestion?
Yeah, hello. I think that it's important at this moment, you know, that we are trying just to get together. You know, is to understand that our contributions are very important, and to empower ourselves and to entice people to empower themselves as well, our friends, to share their thoughts. Because, you know, I think that we are not the voice of the voiceless. No, everyone has a voice, but they need to share it, you know, sometimes with an imperfect language, but it's going to be there, out there. And there are so many, many things that we can share. Sometimes, you know, even create sub-forums in topics, because this is important, organizing organization. Is to be resilient is not something that is going to come, you know, in an easy way. Normally is because you have to overcome a crisis. And then after that, many things that were considered negative at a certain point become a teaching that can help you to get stronger, and sometimes dismiss part of the part for some time, but not necessarily to forget, but to have, you know, in your bundle, the stories that you can use as an example. We were taught, you know, by colonialism to learn the stories about older heroes. Even in my case, you know, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I could recite all the gods from the Greek pantheon and the Romans, and then I learned from the Egyptians and the Assyrians, but I was denied, you know, to learn about my own history. You know, my grandma was a Maya Cachiquel woman, but even in my family, many of them reject to talk about that. And then when I was 12 years old, I started just to get in touch with some of the elders. I learned the music, and then, okay, I was invited to learn about my own culture, or part of my family culture, you know, in partial clandestinity from my own family, because many of them didn't want me. And we need to overcome these kind of things. But it's not to, that's why, even when we were, I was trained as a teacher, and then later on as an engineer, but always you cannot say that I, or what happened with me and my family. No, you have to talk in a third person, you know, in a totally different way. No, the history that you're going to share is your own history. It doesn't matter if you use the proper syntaxes or how, be creative. You also share what you think, share your heart. And this is important. By talking about colonization and decolonizing ourselves, to learn to be resilient is not something that we are going to learn from a book. It's just to listen to the other people's history and empower ourselves, to share our own. And then we can define what is our culture, what is our identity, in which way we are going to use the language. in which way we are just going to connect with one word in an ancient language to share it. It's like said, it's like the Maya calendar. Most of the people that follow the Maya calendar, they don't understand the whole language. They like say today is the day Can. This means the serpent is the expansion of time and energy in the cosmos. You can talk about a lot, but everyone has to do their own research. Like when we say mi wedge or chi mi wedge, what is the real meaning of that? What people try to say with that? When we say all our relations, what we mean or what they mean or what I want to learn. And it's a personal journey. You have to walk yourself through that journey. And that's why it's so beautiful, you know, and thank you for everyone who is, you know, facilitating this opportunity to share. And because there are some more visible faces and there will be many that are invisible that behind the curtains. And we as community, we can just share. And when at the time when we can have physical contact, okay, we can just do our fires, we can just do our songs or do our dances and our storytelling in the way that we can be a traveling band again. As individuals, we can just go as ants, as bees, as you know, as other creatures, and learn from them. It's not necessarily, you know, to change totally our ways, but to strengthen, you know, the way how we define our own identities. And then to accept, you know, that we are going to be different, and that's beautiful. Because out of that differences, there's a lot of richness. And what the colonial system want us to be uniform now, to everybody to react. Everybody goes to McDonald's, everybody has, you know, self-gratification and instant gratification of some things. I don't like this computer, I go to throw it away because there is a new model, especially if it's a phone. But we can just keep the teachings of the tobacco. What tobacco means in different cultures. As Chapter was saying, in Africa, they use tobacco. We use, let's say, the word in tobacco in the Maya languages, in many of these, Mai means friendship. I'm part of you and you are part of me. And that's the thing. And I just will leave it because, you know, we're just short of time, but then please, you know, the other thing is I would encourage to have communications one-to-one. You know, my telephone number and my connection is public. Don't worry, you don't have to ask, you know, for extra permissions, you know. This is allowed as well, you know, each one handles their own privacy in different ways. I'm open in the community, and this is my choice. It's not something that everyone has to be the same. But please, if you have any questions, just contact me. I will call some of you because I think that we need to go more in deep about this fascinating, you know, rebuilding of our cultures and our power, spiritual power.
Be rich, Tito. Yes, I agree. We do need to. Another thing I wanted to point out was the fact that why don't you guys send invitations? And people invite me, I go. I was blessed to go into many other different communities and they invite me to sing because that's what I do, but then they share their community with me and I learn so much when I go in. And another thing I find is when you go in as yourself and not wanting what it is people are offering, but just to learn, it makes for a better response from other people. In our culture, we have a lot of wannabes where they learned something yesterday and they are teaching it the next day. This proves to be a little bit of strife in our communities because of this, but we still welcome them. We do want them to learn. And when we have an event, we have it open for anybody and everyone to come. And we try to make it affordable, understanding the situation of most people of color. And so there's a thought. We are running out of time. I would like to ask Sharp Dopler to do the closing prayer, but I would like one final words from, quick words from Deborah and from Heryka. So Deborah, what do you have to offer? Is Deborah still here?
She's on mute.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay, not a problem.
If you want to know more about the African American Canadian Albertans, you can view a video, a documentary video that we did. It's called We Are the Roots, and it'll take you through immigration from the United States to Canada. It'll talk about the 5 settlements throughout Alberta, the Black settlements that were started in the early 1900s. And it'll talk about today's, and there are 19 interviewees. They range from 40s to over 100 in the documentary, and you'll learn some more about our people in Western Canada. Getting to know each other is important. Like 1-on-1 makes 2-on-2 and 4-on-4 and 8-on-8. It'll just continue to blossom until we all are knowledgeable about each other and the similarities and the commonalities of all of us. That's what I think builds the strength, and we are then become such a powerful nation. We can endure anything. So thank you.
I totally agree with you 100%, and I can't wait till we see those 4 colors melding together. But I think we need to bring those 3 colors first together and get them tight so that we get a handle on the 4th color. That's my personal idea.
Right.
And last but not least, before our prayer, Heryka.
So I just would like to say thank you, and I feel lots of really goodies in my body right now. And what I think I can offer is the reminder to ignite your imagination, you know, be creative, connect to a small seed, you know, and germinate yourself, and then grow and use this land and mold it in different ways. And I'm more than happy to send some resources through email, and I will also send off the People of the Honey recording that I also have to share with everybody. But thank you, Miigwech. Gracias, Matios.
Oh, Miigwech, that's wonderful. I can't wait to see that that recording. All right, sure. Now you've been pre-warned. Are you ready for a closing prayer? I would like to thank everybody who participated in this, and I would like to thank those that have been sitting here patiently listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you come back again for our next webinar, where we will be building on this. Sharp.
Oh, Miigwech. Miigwech Kijimanado. Thank you for the sun, for the moon, for the stars, for the sky, for all of creation. Thank you, Creator, for bringing all of us together today with open minds and open hearts and open spirits. Thank you, Creator, for this time of reflection that we have been gifted. Those old ones are constantly reminding me that in each thing we experience is a teaching, and that our work is simply to understand what the teaching is. Help us to understand, Gijeminado. Help us to understand that what our world needs is compassion, kindness, love, and communication. Miigwech to the people who organize this, who are working to make right relations all around. Miigwech ni kanagana. Gracias. Merci. Thank you.
Oh, Miigwech. And we'll see you next meeting. Miigwech, everyone.
Miigwech.